everyone has heard this quote before, but do you know it actually comes from a famous architect, Ludwig van der Rohe. He was a pioneer in minimalistic design and architecture, and his philosophy emphasized the idea that simplicity and restraint can often lead to a more powerful impact than complexity and excessiveness. This quote serves as a reminder to focus on the essentials when creating something. And obviously at Odoo, we're not building any buildings, but it works incredibly well for any Odoo implementation, especially those with development. Hello, welcome here today, listening to the talk, What are good developments and specifications? My name is Piet Gruyters. I've been working here for 4 years at Odoo, implementing Odoo for customers. I started in the Quick Start team, implementing small and medium-sized enterprises. And I was quite attracted to those projects with development. Quite quickly, I moved to the MMC team, a bit bigger companies, more budget, so more development. There, I worked 2 years as a project manager, trying to keep control over the budget and the planning by challenging as many developments as I can. Now I'm back in the Quickstart team as a team leader, helping my employees, my people in my team with the do's and the don'ts of developing in Odoo. And I thought to myself, why not explain that today here as well? So first, let me quickly define what are developments and specifications for those that don't know, well, how I define them at least. So for me, development is adding custom lines of code to the standard Odoo code base. A specification is a written document that describes how a feature has to be developed to meet the customer's requirements. Now, any development well, you don't have to do development. Of course, in the Odoo implementation methodology, we say the best development is a development that you don't do. It's true that staying standard is still the cheapest and the fastest way to go live. If you do a development, you know that it will at least increase the cost and it will increase the budget. It will also lead to some technical debt in the form of maintenance cost and upgrade cost. But a bad development could delay the go live multiple times. It could extend your project implementation for a long time. It can blow out your budget. It could lead to more and more technical debt, potentially to such a level that you cannot upgrade to a newer version, and it could leave you with an incomplete solution that's maybe even worse than standard. So, in other words, a bad development can put a whole implementation at risk. So obviously I'm here to talk about good developments, but good developments, it's like saying what's a good building or what's good clothing. It depends on the situation. But there are some constants in a bad development. So that's what I'm going to talk about. What are the things that you have to watch out for to not end up with a bad development? Now, to discuss this, we'll go through the steps in the development process. And for each of those, I will talk about the biggest pitfall, the biggest mistake that is made at this step when you end up with a bad development. Then I'll talk about how to avoid these pitfalls, or how we do it at Odoo. And then I give you 1 or 2 questions to ask yourself before going to the next step. And hopefully, at the very least, you'll take these questions home with you and you ask them to yourself the next time you do a development with an Odoo implementation project. Now, what are the steps in the typical development process at Odoo? Well, first, we need to understand the business need, obviously. And once we have the need, we will always first look at the standard workaround. We'll always look if we can just do it with what Odoo offers in standard. If that's not possible, we will go and look for a functional solution, the functional specification of that development, right? So me as a business analyst, I will start writing out functionally how I want the new feature to be. Then a developer joins and they will do the technical analysis. They will continue on the specification and look at the technical risks. They will also look at the feasibility of whatever I'm proposing as a business analyst, and they will give a budget. So this is the moment when you have the complete cost of a development, and now we have to go to the customer approval. right? So we need to, the customer, this is the point where he needs to choose if he wants to go for the development or not. If he says yes, we start our development. And interesting fact actually about this, even though development takes a long time, typically at Odoo, the actual writing of the code is not what takes that much time. So that goes fast. If you've done everything before well, development goes fast. The testing, and next we just have the push to production, and our customers can use the development just like that. Okay, right? Let's start with understanding the business needs. What is the biggest pitfall for any bad development is confusing the customer's wants with needs. So if you do that, you risk solving a problem, not the actual issue at hand. Even though the customer might say, I need this, you have to keep digging, you have to keep asking to make sure to actually get the pain point. What are we actually solving with this development? One way how we do this is the 5 whys. This is a good practice, let's say at Odoo. And it basically says you should ask why 5 times before you listen to the need. You have to really understand what is the need. And I'm pushing on this because it's really one of the most important things. Most of the bad developments, that if you have a bad development at the end, it's because you confused the wants with the needs. Let me give you an example of the 5 whys. Customer says, I need my tasks in my project in a certain color. Okay, why? So that my employee recognizes them quickly. Yeah, but why? Well, it has to be visible on the printout. Yeah, but why do you print out your tasks? Well, they can't make any changes on the laptop. Okay, why can't they make any changes? I don't trust them. Okay, well, the actual need is he doesn't trust his employees, so we have to use access rights in Odoo and filters on the tasks. We don't have to have it in a specific color. We just need 2 completely separate things. And that's a good example of the 5 whys. Don't confuse the want with the need. So, sorry. On top of that, you saw it already, align the Spock and the key users. More often than not, especially in bigger projects, you have a Spock or a single point of contact. And this person will gather information of everybody in the team to figure out what do we all have to implement. But the Spock, let's say for this example, we have the CEO or the CFO of the company, and he's going to implement, he's going to change his company, he's going to add Odoo. He has talked with the purchasing manager, and he comes back and he says to me, yes, I need this, this, and this. Okay, but does the CEO actually work day to day with the purchasing manager? No. There might be some miscommunication. In the end, we're developing something that the actual end user doesn't need. So make sure the Spock and the key user are aligned. One thing you can do is do an as-is workshop. So you just go to the key user, the person that will use Odoo, the person that will use the development, and just sit next to them and just look how they're working day to day, and just try to see, what is really the pain point. So these are some things you can do to make sure to understand the business need. And one thing that you can ask yourself is, do we understand the real why? Does the need make sense? If it doesn't, then you probably didn't ask why enough. Okay, next step, looking for a standard workaround. Now, if I look back and I ask around, what are issues on bad development? How did we end up with a bad development? And you look at this step, what went wrong here? It's the client didn't understand Odoo when you were looking for a standard workaround. The client says, no, I want this solution, I want this, I want it exactly like I had it before. And he doesn't understand Odoo, he doesn't know all the things that Odoo can do. So what you have to do, especially if you feel that the development that the client is asking for is nonsensical, is to, obviously, you do a demonstration of what the standard provides, but go that extra step. Use demo data, use Studio, use whatever you can to convince the customer that actually his development is not worth it. And then, if he still wants to go, push MVP. Especially in MMC projects, this is something I had to do all the time. Why? Because yeah, you have these have customers, they have more money, they want to do development, so you cannot use the budget aspect to say no, 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 this is not gonna be useful. So you need to use the time aspect. You have to say, okay, we will do the development, but is it really critical to go live? MVP, for those that don't know, minimal viable product. You just need to focus on what is the minimum software that you need to have for the customer to go live. So what happens? You say, okay, I'll do the development. You keep it in the backlog, you keep it in the pipe, but you go live, and maybe, more often than not, they will never do the development in the end, because in the end, the standard is good enough. So the question you need to ask yourself before going to the next step, why can't we go live in standard right now? And then another side question is, has my client actually tried working on Odoo? Because sometimes they just they don't want to try, and they do a development that in the end will be a bad development after it's all said and done. Okay, a good example of this, document layout. I'm sure that everybody has seen it already in version 18. We can do so much with our documents. We have so much flexibility, but you would still have customers that say, no, 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 I need my documents exactly like it was before. Then go that extra step. Try to convince them try to make the best possible document to show them, no, standard is good enough. Standard will work. Okay, next step, writing a functional solution. So there's no standard workaround. We now need to do the development. This is my role as a business analyst. I will write out functionally in a specification, how will I do this development? What do I want to see? Here, the issue is really not everybody understands the solution. What do I mean by this? Well, I have to make sure that my customer and my developer both understand the same thing. How do you do that? Well, limit noise. Less is more. You want to really just make it write out the essentials, because if you're going to write more and more and more and more, the more chance that something is misunderstood, that something doesn't work. Also, schematic approach. I don't know if you've already seen it, but we use Excalidraw, which is just a drawing system, and you can just make a schematic approach of how whatever you want to do. Let me give you an example. This, you might recognize if you read closely. This is actually a feature that R&D has implemented a year ago. You make it visual. In the end, you're the functional analyst. The developer has to understand how to do this in the code. Okay? So, the question you need to ask yourself, are the customer, the BA, and developer all on the same page? Do they understand the same thing? Otherwise, you develop something, you show it to the customer, and the customer is going to be upset because he understood that you're developing something else. Now, technical risks. This is the step where my developer analyzes the technical risks. Okay, I'm going to be honest, I'm not a developer. So if you really want to know what are the risks in the code, then you have to go watch some of these amazing development talks that we have here or that are on YouTube. But there are some things that I do know. If you want to do something that will break Odoo's logic, more often than not, it's going to end up as a bad development. What are examples of breaking Odoo's logic? Yeah, you want to, let's say you want to change bank synchronization, the stock reservation. You want to change the way that bills of materials are created. These type of things that are so complex and that touch too much, that touch too many models, the chance is very high it is going to end up with a bad development. Well, a bad development, something that will take a very long time and will cost a lot of money, and then in the end, is it really that worth it? Also, a small thing, don't try to do developments after doing a lot of studio customizations. This is something that I say all the time in the Quickstart team. If you do a lot of studio customizations and then you want to act on that, a developer has to act on that, it's going to create a mess. So what they have to do, the developers, they have to actually take that studio code and well, add it to development, the code that they're writing for the development. So at the very least, know that will cost a bit more if you want to suddenly have the studio code also in part of your development. Now here, ask yourself, maybe not ask yourself, ask your dev, is it a good idea from a technical point of view to do this development? Okay, step 5. Now we've finished our analysis, we've written our specification. This is the moment where where the first time that we have an actual cost, and we know the cost of this development. So now we go back to the customer and we ask for his approval. Does he want to pay that for his development? So the pitfall here is the customer that's too stuck up, that's too focused on what they want, that they don't actually look at what is the actual value of the development. What you can do is you have to look at this moment to the frequency. Let me give you an example. If a customer wants a automatic export out of Odoo with a lot of complicated calculations for 2 times a year, let's say for accounting, you want a report. Well, is it really worth it to spend an enormous amount of money on this to develop this, or can we just do an export and we just do it in Excel? I would say no. I say we do the export. So that's what you can do. You can just actually put monetary value. You put the development that is going to cost and the cost of, let's say, the employee, and you compare. And it sounds simple, but often we just don't do it. We don't take the time for that. And in the end, we say, well, actually, this development was not worth it. Also, a good tip, if you are working with somebody, with a customer, and you have your point of contact, single point of contact, and you have the feeling that he's not fully aligned, he doesn't know exactly what we should and shouldn't do, include the sponsor. In the end, the sponsor, what I mean by the person that is actually paying for the development, make sure that he agrees on the development, because otherwise you will have discussions. That could happen, that has happened in these MMC projects. So ask yourself here, is the development really worth it now and in the future? Point 6, testing of the development. So you don't have to work for 4 years at Odoo to know that the issue, what leads to a bad development, what the mistake that we make here is not enough testing, obviously. Yeah, I don't know how to say it differently. We need to test enough. One thing we do, especially if you have bigger developments, is to write out all the use cases. Make sure that you have listed all the possible scenarios and then test them out. Ideally, you have these use cases before you have them when you start writing your specification. But if that's not the case, then do it here. Because otherwise, what will happen is you test it, it looks good, you push it to production, they start using it, and you have bugs, errors, feedbacks, change requests, bad data that is gets registered in Odoo. That's not what you want. Another thing is to combine all the testing in one flow. If you know that you want to do a lot of changes on, let's say, your inventory, make sure to do all the developments and then test them together, because if you don't, things won't work, things will break. So ask yourself at this step, did we test all the use cases? Finally, so we've pushed to production, the future of the development, what happens afterwards? Let's say you've done everything perfectly, you just delivered a very good development, like mwah. Then you can still make it a bad development by the lack of documentation. Because ask any consultant here, if you have a handover and you suddenly have to jump into a project where there were a lot of developments, there's no documentation, it's a nightmare. You don't know what has been done, why we've done this development. So make sure at the final step to at least document properly what you did, why you did it, to make sure that you have everything there so anybody in the future can take it and can understand it. A small tip you can use with your customers, just add the document app, add the knowledge application in the customer's database and just write it there. It could be that simple. And a good question to ask yourself here is this development clear for anybody outside? that is not involved in the development yet? If yes, then you've documented enough. Okay, these are all the steps. So what are the questions you need to ask yourself? Do we understand the real why? Why can't we go live in standard? Is everyone on the same page if we're looking at the functional specification? Ask this one to your developer. Could this break Odoo? Is this development worth it now and in the future? Did we test all the use cases before pushing to production? And is the development clear to anybody outside of Odoo or outside of development? If you ask all these questions yourself and you have a good answer on it, I'm sure that all of you will deliver a good development. Well, I hope you like this. I hope this will help. Please, if you have any questions, thank you for listening to my talk. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for this insightful presentation. We are waiting for the questions now.
Great.
But in the meantime, maybe you can explain in terms of testing before pushing into production.
Yep.
Where does our responsibility exactly end, and when does the one of the customer start?
Oh, good question. It's definitely a shared responsibility, for sure. For me, if I'm a functional analyst, I need to make sure that whatever I want my customers to test is at least a good development. It's actually solving what I've written down in my specification. So first I will always test. I will just go back to my specification. I check, okay, what I'm doing now in Odoo, this is what I asked for. If that's not the case, I go back to my developer and he has to make changes. If that is the case, then I go to the customer and he or she has to test. And there, more often than not, what happens is they figure out that they actually need a bit more, or it's not perfect yet. But if you properly define what you need in the beginning, then the testing should go smoothly, of course. So actually, the testing, ideally, it goes very smooth because you did all the steps before correct. But it's definitely a shared responsibility. And they are they have to give the final go-ahead. So if they say, yes, I tested, let's push to production, it's the customer's responsibility. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, are the best practices on how to write the specification and the schematics? Is there?
Yes, actually yes. There are some best practices. We try to really, when I say limited noise, I mean basically try to make it as visual as possible. Don't write too much text. Text can be misunderstood. If you just show in Odoo what you want to change, just an X or an extra button, if that's what you want, yeah, that's the easiest. And also, your developer has to think. You don't make it too easy. Don't do the thinking for the developer. They are smart enough to figure out how they want to do something. So if you're going to write, I use this field, and you're going to do the technical names of a field, then it's too much. Yeah. If you want something easy, something that's going to help the customer, it shouldn't be a complex specification. If you look back, you're like, wow, this is so complex, and maybe this is not a good development.
Okay, thank you. Which tool do you use for documentation? Where do you write needs, estimations, and functional specification?
Good question. Yeah, we use in Odoo. So we have a project which, especially for quick start, which is typically for all the quick start developments for any customer that needs some development, and then we just use one task where we write down in the description our business need, functional analysis. Often it's just a link to our Excalidraws or a schematic overview, and then technically the developer will do an estimation. So on our side, we can go back and find this because this is linked to the project of the customer. But if the customer, they should use the knowledge application or wherever they want to store their documents.
Mm-hmm. Does Odoo have a template for the project specification for an Odoo implementation?
Oh yeah, I mean it's a bit different. Yeah, we use. Yeah, we have a template. I mean, I don't know if I have it available. Yeah, no. I mean, whoever asked this, come afterwards, and I'll happily share it with you.
Where can they meet you afterward?
Here in the corner.
Okay. Is it not dangerous to document the development in the customer database? He might remove it, or people from the upgrade team might not know where to find it.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I think you have to document from both sides. Like, I think there's a responsibility on our side to document it in Odoo, of course, but also from the customer side, because people change. Maybe the person that developed this or asked for this development is gone, and suddenly nobody knows why they needed it. So the customer should document it, and I think the Knowledge app is a good place to do that.
Okay. Any funny example of bad development?
A lot. Well, a lot. Funny example. Yeah. No. I mean, the thing is, there are so many that you think, well, this has been a wordless development. And I asked around for people, but I don't have one example. Sorry.
Could you give us some more examples of good questions a developer could ask to get a better understanding of the needs of a new development?
Good questions. Well, a developer. Yeah, I would say the developer should ask, in the end, like, yeah, what's the need? I mean, the good question is, what is the actual need? Why will you use this? Who will use this? Is a good question. How often will they use it? Yeah, I don't know. It's yeah. As a developer, I think a good question for a developer would be, is this always the case? Because a developer works in rules, right? So you're gonna add a rule. He should ask you, okay, but are you sure that this is always the case? Because if not, then you need to add extra rules, or the development is not useful.
Okay, thank you. Amazing. Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you.